Okay, so here we have our engine. Now, this is an M9601, which is the early engine. It's called a 5-chain in technical industry jargon. And this particular engine has the 5 timing chains. It has the variable valve timing wear pads that are known to wear, and it has 99,000 miles on it. Well, VUs lasted a lot longer than most because most of these engines beyond 50,000 already have camshaft deviations that are beyond questionable. And they are already beyond the 6 degrees, which is allowable by Porsche in the factory specifications. So due to that, we're going to end up pulling off the scavenge pump. We're going to remove the valve cover. We're going to remove a lot of other pieces to do with the valve train, and we're going to replace those variable valve timing wear pads with a new and improved version that will be more resistant to wear and will provide a little bit more service life for the engine.
Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications by clicking on the bell icon and never miss a video. We've got lots of Porsche content coming your way.
We're creating our resource material, right? We need to pay attention to how this is indexed because you can put it in backwards.
Okay.
See the 1-3?
Yep.
We're working on bank 1 through 3. That always faces toward the crankshaft.
Okay.
On 4-6, 4-6 faces toward the crankshaft, which is over here, see? A little bit of oil is going to come out, not a lot, but a little bit. You can tell this is a very early engine because of the color of the bolts, and it also has a 2-piece exhaust cam sprocket. So this internal portion here that drives the scavenge pump, as you can see right here, the later engines, even a little bit later in the 3-4 series, had a single piece, and I like to upgrade to that. Nothing wrong with a double, but it's just one extra part you really don't have to have. But this just really indicates how early this engine is. Next, pull the cam cover off. All right, so VU is in the process of removing the Bank 1 camshaft cover. Now, you see here we've installed a special tool, which actually comes in the factory Porsche cam timing tool set, and you can buy it separately as well. And there's several different special tools we're going to use during this process. This one has to go on before the camshaft cover can be removed. And the reason for that is because there's valve spring tension on these valves, and that would actually take the camshafts and try to force the cover off when we don't want that to happen. So this tool protrudes into the back of the camshafts just a little bit, and it holds load on them so they don't try to put undue stress on the cam cover as it is removed. So he's just going to continue on here. Okay, and at this point, the cam cover, we're going to make sure all the bolts are out, and if they are, we're going to lever it in a couple of very precise areas where there's a couple of bosses that allow us to pry on it. And you notice here, our spark plug tubes are still in place. So with these, we know they're probably going to break because they haven't been removed and the engine's 25 years old. And the material these are made out of is very brittle. So we are choosing to pull the camshaft cover off and leave these installed in hopes that we don't have a lot of plastic break when these tubes try to get individually removed and end up somewhere down inside the cylinder head. So doing it this way, the chances of pulling them out in one piece is much better. We are going to replace them with new ones.
I noticed all the bolts for the majority of the top were all the same size. These two are shorter.
Yes, because those, all they're doing is holding this seal in. So this is the actuator solenoid where the power comes in for the change of your variable valve timing. So that's all they're doing. So just so everybody can kind of get an idea here, most of these bolts that you see around the perimeter, their only job is to kind of hold the camshaft cover in place so it doesn't leak. But these two, these two, these two, these two, those two, they are actually camshaft bearing mount points. So when you torque these, it's important they're all torqued evenly because you're actually torquing a main cap, so to speak, on the camshaft bearing.
Got it.
All right, time to pry it off.
Yep, get us a big pry bar, and we're going to easily work around. This sealant's been on here for 25 years, so when you're doing this, you want to start on one corner, put a little bit of pressure, and just take your time, because you can break things when you start to pull this off. These can be really tough to remove if they've been on here this long.
Okay. What point should we start first?
So I try to start like up in here somewhere, like which you can just like that. Yes, you go just a little bit.
Yeah. Oh, it came off, huh? And so it's
You missed it, because I'm like, that should be prying open more.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't see that one.
And you see all our tubes came off in one piece. So here's your wear pads right here.
How are they?
Well, I mean, you can't see much. You can see it's eroded.
Yeah.
Okay, now we have to bolt this bad boy in right here. There you go. You can finish it off. They don't have to be torqued. Just run them down. All they're going to do is they're going to hold the cams in a little bit better. Yep, that's all you got to do.
Okay. So
Just get you a ratchet and go on there.
this one. How far you want to go?
Actually, let me feel it. I can kind of tell based on the way it feels.
Oh, so you're pushing the ramp in, so this.
But there's a ramp on the other side.
focused on the chain tensioner thing that you're doing now.
Yeah.
with that camera.
See those discolored links?
Yeah.
That's what I was talking about.
Oh.
We're going to have to mark those on the new ones. That's it.
Wow.
Okay, here you go.
Got it.
And see that, now it's compressed. It just kind of flops around. You got to have it compressed like that so we can pull everything out. Okay, so in preparation of removal of these camshafts, we've had to use two more special tools that will actually now allow us to remove the first special tool. So here, this particular tool was first put in place so we could remove the cam cover. Once the cam cover was off, then we wanted to make sure we could retain the cams because there was no cover here. So we used this special tool, okay? Now, we've also used another special tool, and we'll throw the part numbers of the tools here in the link for you. And these tools are used to compress the hydraulic chain tensioner that the fourth and fifth, if you will, timing chains rely on. This is what adjusts the camshaft timing during the different RPM ranges. Around 2200 to 5200, the camshafts change position. And there's a lot about the way that whole system works that you can read in the intro books and all that. So what you see here, Vu, these are discolored links.
Right.
Everybody will see these a little later on. So while we're creating our own resource material, we're paying attention to where these links are. And Vu, somebody's been here before.
Really?
Because they missed the link. That discolored link should be over that dot, and it's not.
Oh.
Which means the one down here is also in the improper location. It's no big deal because we can actually count the teeth between there, and it's the same difference.
Yeah.
But the factory discolored these links so you didn't have to count them. Okay? So somebody has definitely been here before, at least on this side. Now, the other side is the side that had the worst cam deviations. So I'm wondering if at some point in prior ownership, somebody did the wear pads on this side. But it was so long ago that it's still the old material. Because if it was the new material, it would be a lot lighter colored than that. So you can see very clearly they are one tooth off.
Right.
Now, is there a possibility that was messed up at the factory? Always.
Yeah.
Because the sealant did look like factory sealant. And it did not look like it had been off in 25 years. So who knows? But that is improper, as you can see right here. So now the next thing we're going to do is we're now going to remove this first special tool because it would keep us from removing the camshafts in a little bit of a way. We're going to pull this one off. We're going to leave this one on. We're going to leave this hydraulic unit compressed. Then we're going to loosen up these cam caps. We're going to make sure they're proper because the number you see right here has to match the number right here on the cylinder head.
It does.
See that number?
Right.
And that number?
688, 9688. Yep.
Okay. And the same thing
Right here.
right there on that cap, yes. Same thing. So And then you see an A and an E. We're going to talk about that. If everybody's doing this at home, this is a good time to survey the situation and understand that the caps between the intake cam and the exhaust cam are different, and that E does not stand for exhaust. It stands for ein or in. So you see right here, this cap has an E on it.
Right.
For E, for ein, the intake side, because it's the top cam, the intake cam.
This is A.
A, yes, which stands for exhaust in German, okay? So now we're going to unbolt a few things, take these caps off, and then we're going to free the cams up with the timing chain removed, and we'll be able to remove this special tool and remove all of this as one unit.
All right.
If you thought we were invasive last night,
Oh.
you ain't seen anything yet.
Here we go. All right, so I'll start by taking this one off.
Yep, pull that one out of our way. There you go, put them in that little sprocket piece in the bag. All right, so now at this point, we're ready to actually get these camshafts out of the cylinder head. So what Vu has done, after we compressed the hydraulic unit, we put some slack in the chain. We had removed the 4 bolts from the exhaust cam sprocket to free that up. Now we're gonna remove the exhaust cam sprocket to kind of release things so we're not, the timing chain doesn't have us held captive. And then we're gonna remove this special tool here, and at that point, the camshafts will be free and they'll be able to come out as a unit. So you're going to have exhaust cam, intake cam, hydraulic adjuster unit, and the solenoid will all come out together. So here, this is the reluctor wheel. It's only got 1 target on it. Some cars have got a lot of targets. Actually, the newer engines have 4 of these on them, but this one only has 1. This is what the camshaft sensor reads, okay? The Hall effect sensor. So if you bend this or it gets removed from the camshaft somehow, whatever, it can make you have camshaft timing faults that really don't exist. So you want to be careful with this, take a picture of it, make sure it doesn't get damaged. So if it did get damaged or bent, you can put it back right the way it was supposed to be. These electrical solenoid units for the hydraulic adjuster, this is what takes the electronic signal from the ECU and it tells the hydraulic unit to adjust. These are getting hard to find, they're expensive, and the wires are bad about breaking right here. Now, typically they will break right in this area because they've been oil soaked for a long time, because what we call the football seal that goes around this has been leaking. Yours wasn't leaking, so it's only got a little bit of oil on it now. I think your wire's okay, but these will fray and break right there. Yeah, those upper ones, gravity should do a job holding them in. All right, so just take that loose and take it off. There you go. See, that's what would have happened without that tool. Okay. And those bolts belong with the tool, by the way. So.
Okay.
All right, now, okay, Vu, you're going to take your left hand and you're going to support it up there toward the front of that exhaust cam, and you're going to kind of take your, in that area, and then you're going to just pull the whole thing out, both cams and that unit all together.
You guys watch your... One second,
Yep. I think not moving anymore. So.
Just got to shake it a little bit. There you go.
The lifters aren't moving.
Okay.
All right, that's good. They're still sitting.
Okay.
All right, just go set it on the bench or wherever you want to put it. Okay, so Vu is in the process of the final teardown, if you will, of the intake and exhaust cams that are kind of combined here with the hydraulic adjuster unit that sets our variable valve timing. So Vu, go ahead and let's try to get the chains off and get the cams separated and just pull that hydraulic unit out of the way.
Yeah, so the key was everything was kind of snug. This is still compressed. The key was getting it off and over these 2 points first, which then give you enough slack to get them off of the sprockets here.
Which is why you need the special tool to compress the hydraulic unit. Now, if anybody does this at home, make sure that you don't crank down on this special tool too much, because it'll end up bending the tool. Also, if you buy a new hydraulic tensioner unit, it actually comes with a tool because they ship it this way, already compressed.
I see. Now you can obviously see, look at this, Damon. This is a perfectly new Porsche part with no grooves and some serious grooves on the pads on the car.
So what you're seeing here is that the rail portions of these chains have been riding on these outer extremities of this pad for 99,000 miles, and it's got a lot of high unit loading because the entire chain is not contacting this, just those outer rails, and that is what starts to wear it. Now you notice that you see some porosity in there. That's part of the wear process, but it also says that the internal portions of this wear pad are somewhat porous.
Yep.
So at that point, that's one reason I believe that the factory changed material, and these are a lot harder and a lot more wear resistant than the originals are. Also, your oil change intervals and the kind of oil that you use, all those things play into the health and well-being of these wear pads, especially the original ones. Now flip it over.
You predicted that the bottom would have more wear. Here we go. And indeed it does. Look at that.
The bottom is always worse.
Wow, it's grooves are much deeper.
It was so deep that you notice the chain rollers in the middle of the chain were even hitting it.
Yep,
Yes.
So definitely went deeper and further.
Yes.
So let's snap these off.
Just kind of take your thumbs and just kind of pop them, and they'll come off. They fit kind of tight.
Oh.
There it is. Pay attention because one uses an O-ring, okay?
Right.
Because it has these two holes in it. The other one does not. So that one does not, and then you just pop it in place.
This one popped much easier.
Yep. So these have a 1996 date code on them.
There you go. The magic touch.
You got to make sure the O-ring stays where it's supposed to belong there.
Goes on so much easier. All right.
Okay, now take that old chain and pull it off, and we're going to notice something different about it and the replacement for it. Never drop a camshaft.
Yeah.
All right, so now, side with the discolored links, throw that up.
Let's go this colored one here.
Yep.
There's only one.
Two. One there and one there. So lay it out straight,
Yeah.
and then pull it all the way out, just like that. Now, we're going to do the same thing with this chain, and we're going to line it up, and we're doing this for two reasons. We want to make sure this chain is right, because we assume nothing and we quantify everything. We make sure they're the same length, okay? And they are. And then we're going to line that up there, and then pull this down here, and then these two discolored links are critical for allocation of the camshafts.
Okay.
Pre-allocation. So we need to get a Sharpie, and we need to put marks on this one and this one. And those are going to signify the same.
On this one?
Yep. Just make you a nice heavy mark there that we can see later. Yep. Same thing there. Because the factory chains have these discolored links, which aided in the engine assembly at the factory.
Okay.
And it also aids us today. Sometimes you'll buy genuine chains and they still have the discolored links.
Okay.
All right, now it'll be time to clean up these camshaft lobes and put everything back together again.
So degrease them, or?
Yeah, I would use your brake cleaner.
Okay.
Just get as much oil off of it as you can. There you go. See, that one little thing, that made a difference, see?
Upside down, Bill.
Now, okay, but look, we have to double check.
Check the spot.
Are your dots at 12 o'clock, and are your marked links on the dots? You got it?
Here's the task at hand. All we need to do is we removed the chain, we marked the different color chains to match up here, but when you put it all back together, of course we've replaced the pads already, you need to put them in so that the dots on the cams match up to the marks that you created on the chain. They're sitting at 12 o'clock, but all at the same time, fitting it under the tensioner piece here and then over this lip. Sounds pretty easy, but what you're going to need is a little trick that Jake did not share with me until he started seeing me sweat, and that is these two pads move up and down, and if you move them up, it gives you just enough flex or room to be able to lift the chain up and over. And once you celebrate there, you still have to verify that the dots are still in the same location that they need to be. Again, the dots on each cam matching up the markings of the links that you did. So just like that, we're done here. Now it goes back on the motor. I'm coming over with the assembly.
Yep. And you're going to put that where those dots are facing out.
Sliding in.
Your dots are facing out toward you, right?
They are.
Okay, good. So what you want to do now, each of these are torqued to 10 Newton meters. Okay, so now what we want to do, everything back here looks okay. So this is a little bit of a scenario where things are going to get a little odd because we're going to put this side together partially, but we're not going to complete any of this.
Because you need to be able to come back here.
You need to be able to correct the cam timing on both sides back to back. See what I mean?
Yep.
So why don't you torque these to about 5 Newton meters. We just need them tight enough that they'll stay in position. So now at this point, if we weren't going to do the other side, then we would put cam timing tools in back there, and we would tighten them in place, loosen these bolts a little bit, let that cam go where the tools tell it to go, then retorque it, then put the cover on. But since we got to do the other side, and we want to perfect the cam timing on both sides, we want to leave this exposed. So now, I think probably the easiest thing to do, we're going to leave this tool on in the back. Because if we put the tool back here to hold it,
I need it for the other side.
Well, not just that, but you can't put the cam timing tool here later. We've got 2 of these. So we can put one here and do one over there. So now, take the 5 and loosen this up. Well, you may not even have to. Well, you have to have a little bit. And that's going to put tension back in that. All right, so we've mostly completed bank 1 here with reassembly. So Vu was able to take the sub-assembly of the 2 camshafts, the hydraulic adjuster unit, and bring them over into the cylinder head. Showed him a little trick about taking some assembly grease, wiping all the oil out of the lifter bores, getting everything clean of oil, and then putting some grease on those lifters so they would stay in place. Because if not, well, they want to fall out because gravity's not your friend here. Now here on the intake side, gravity was our friend and it held all the intake lifters where they belong. So if you do this at home, you got to make sure that you keep the lifters per location because they've been married to those cam lobes and been running there for 99,000 miles. You don't want to take this lifter or this lifter and swap them on the cam lobes. You want to keep them where they belong at all costs. You've got to do that. So then we put our special tools back on here, and then we removed the compression tool from here after Vu had the exhaust camshaft sprocket back in place and lightly held in a certain location with the 4 bolts that we have replaced. So you always want to replace those 4 bolts on the exhaust cam sprocket. One thing he had to do, just because everything's kind of changed here with reallocation of these parts, he had to move one more set of teeth or one more roller on the exhaust cam chain on that sprocket to get it where it needed to be so we could set the cam timing later. You want it to be right in the middle of that range, and it was not there. It was kind of where it was before, which is a little too far out of range for me. Now, one thing you got to do when you're doing this, and the factory manuals in the early days left it out, is when you move from one bank of cylinders to the other bank, you've got to pull the pin out of the crankshaft, and we have to rotate the crankshaft pulley 360 degrees back to that same location that it's in right now. What that's going to do is going to set up our camshaft positions on the other bank so they're just as proper as they were over here. If you don't do that, you're going to take things apart in the wrong manner, and then you're going to reassemble it, and the cams are going to be phased together. If that happens, you have created two 3-cylinder engines with the same exact camshaft timing, and that does not run. That was a very common problem back in the day. I can tell you, we used to get 3 or 4 phone calls a month from technicians and shops, everybody else that were trying to do this job, but they were following the factory manual, and the manual was wrong.
Wow.
So I'm going to stick that back in for now, and we're just going to go ahead and make sure these bolts are tight enough. We've already kind of put a wrench on them, just tight enough they're going to hold the cams in here, and then we're going to go ahead, pull the pin, rotate the crank, and do the same thing on the other side. All right, so now I'm going to show you guys a little bit of a trick. I call things like this a silver bullet, okay? So when we're installing the camshaft cover, applying the correct amount of sealant is always a bit of a challenge. So a few years ago, several of us figured out a trick to make sure that this little drain at the back of the camshaft area here stayed clear when we were applying the RTV sealant to the perimeter. So if you end up with sealant in this groove, it will actually end up creating a high pressure area here because oil pressure is feeding these journals, and it will build up pressure, and it will actually make this plug, the green plug you'll see us install later, eject from the engine. And then you'll have a huge oil leak, and you'll find that there's a plug missing. Then you'll replace the plug, and it will do it over and over again because the little drain that allows this oil pressure to escape here has become clogged up with sealant, okay? So if we take this piece of cut up scavenge pump O-ring and we just put it in like this and we leave it setting here, then once we've got all the sealant on and once the cam cover is installed and completely torqued up, we'll be able to simply just remove this, and it will leave this pathway completely clear. All right, so you might wonder what Vu's doing here. He's actually removing the residual old sealant, the RTV sealant applied by the factory, from the camshaft cover. Once he finishes that, he's going to come to the camshaft cover surface here on the cylinder head, and he's going to do the same thing here. It's imperative that all the old sealant is completely removed, and then we're going to end up using carburetor cleaner, some form of solvent, and we're going to wipe this area completely dry of all oil and residual RTV. If you don't do things like this to prepare these surfaces, you can expect an oil leak from this surface. All right, and then do those other little pads here too. Yeah, each of those. And then do the same thing on this side. You got it? Get it up on that dowel pin right there. Yeah. Okay, so now we are roughly setting our cam timing. This is not the final cam timing procedure because we've done a lot of work inside both the cam covers. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the Porsche special tool here on the rear of the engine so we can roughly set the cam timing, and Vu is going to put some torque on the cam sprocket bolts here on the exhaust and just tighten them enough that we can roll the engine back 360 degrees clockwise again and restart the cam timing procedure for the final time over on bank 1. This is the proper way to do it because if we would have set bank 1 previously, we'd come over here and do some work, then more than likely we would have cam timing deviations because of the order in which we did the work. I've learned, do it this way, rough it in, go over to the other side, make sure everything's good to go, apply the tools, set the cam timing, and that will be a procedure we're going to show you a little bit later here.
We're really into this deep now. As I mentioned earlier, the cam timing deviations were pretty severe for this motor. And so here we are, and if you could explain to our viewers here the importance of cam timing and what we're about to do next.
Well, cam timing is everything to any engine, right? You've got to have proper timing for things to operate correctly. So with Vu's engine, these wear pads that guide these chains that go between the intake and exhaust cams, they were severely worn, and they were worn to the point that his deviations were almost twice as much as they were supposed to be by the factory allowable. So we've gone through the procedure of changing them out. All the camshaft goodies were removed. Vu changed these on the bench, and now we have roughly set the cam timing just so we can get the cams put back into place and finish the cam timing procedure. So we did a reallocation of the cam timing between the intake and the exhaust cams by marking our chain here, and then we installed the entire hydraulic unit with the new pads back into the engine, and then we used one of our cam timing tools to get things kind of close. At this point now we're ready to go ahead and set the final cam timing. Now, since we did these repairs on both sides of the engine, I chose, based on experience, to just roughly set the cam timing on this side, then go to bank 2, fight with everything on that side we had to fight with, and then put those camshafts back in. Now we've rotated the engine back 360 degrees again, and we are at the point where we want to begin the final cam timing procedure here on bank 1. Once we complete bank 1, we're going to pull that pin out of the crankshaft again. We're going to rotate 360 degrees clockwise. We're going to go to bank 2, and we're going to do the same exact thing.
With everything back together, now the most important part, I think, is to make sure that the timing is correct.
Absolutely. And Vu, you didn't realize it, but you actually did one of the most critical parts of cam timing over on the bench. And that was making sure that we transferred those discolored links to the new chain with the dots we put on here with a Sharpie.
Matching up the dots.
Exactly.
To the chain marks, yeah.
And then you also did not know that when I said, hey, make sure when you get these camshafts in allocation with each other, that the dots on each cam are facing up. And then that you had the amount of chain links between that we had determined. That allocation was critical to this process. So when I said make sure they're facing up, you held the cams in the same location and came over and transferred them into the engine and installed them in this manner. So what you did was roughly set the cam timing between the cams already.
And I didn't even know it.
Didn't even know it, okay? And that was actually the final allocation of cam timing for the camshafts to each other. So the center lines of the cams are where the factory wanted them to be. So now what we have to do is make sure that the camshafts are correctly allocated to the crankshaft center line, which the factory made that very easy for us. People that have done this with an air-cooled engine, you have to use dial indicators and you have to use different things. But starting with a 964, Porsche started using jigs for this. The jigs are different for a 964 to a 993, but these jigs are also different between a 5-chain engine that has this chain that connects the two cams and a 3-chain engine. The 3-chain camshaft tool looks a lot different, and the back of the cams are different. It actually will protrude into each cam, where this one only protrudes into the exhaust cam.
So this control here can spin this.
Yeah, so basically what happens is this tool is designed so the tighter that you tighten this particular knob, as long as you have these bolts loosened, this will mechanically force the camshaft where it belongs. There's a slight wedge shape here that matches the camshaft, and that will literally mechanically move this cam where it needs to be. So at this point, all we have to do, now that we've got our crankshaft locked at the proper location in the little teardrop of the crankshaft pulley, okay? We've got everything allocated here with this chain. You've already got everything mocked up here and just a little bit of finger tight torque on those bolts, and I've got this tightened and everything's to the head. Now I just make sure that I easily move this portion of the tool back and forth, okay? and then you can tighten these 4 bolts up. But what I want to do first is put the camshaft cover on.
Okay.
Because this tool, to make it get the camshaft deviation exactly where it needs to be, is designed so the camshaft cover is in the equation.
Okay.
So if we do this, pretty much I just wanted to show this the way it is so everybody at home would understand the geometry of all this and how it actually works. But the tool is designed so you would have the camshaft cover on and then have this tool fitted before you tighten those 4 bolts up. Obviously your scavenge pump is still removed, so you still have full access to those 4 bolts.
All right, well, let's get to it.
You can go ahead and torque it. It goes to 10 Newton meters on all of those. All right, we can pull off this tool, the bridge in the back now. Okay, so now we're going to do a final torque on the 4 bolts on the exhaust camshaft sprocket while we've got the special tool inserted here at the back of the camshaft. And as you can see, this goes in and out with no resistance at all. So this is why it's important when you do this final procedure that the camshaft cover is part of the equation. Earlier, I wanted you to see everything inside of the cam cover so you had an idea of how the tool works and where everything is at, just for illustration purposes. So I've got my handle tightened here, I've got my handle tightened here, and now I've got no resistance on the top portion here, which if the cam timing was not correct, this would not insert into the back of this camshaft at the cover and the cylinder head, or it would do so with great resistance. All right, so Vu, you want to come in and torque those 4 bolts for me.
All right.
And now these do have a higher torque value than most of the other 6x1 millimeter bolts on this engine, and they are special bolts and they are one-time use only. And those bolts have been upgraded over the years. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about what we did installing the camshaft cover. So experience leads us down different paths over decades or years. And one thing that I've learned is I don't really pay attention to factory protocols. That's just me. I break rules every day. So the sealant you see here is white. This is a personal preference. Over the years, Porsche has offered different sealants for this. Loctite 5900 is one of them. Dry Bond is another one of them. And this sealant is neither of them. And it's something that I don't really even talk about because it is truly a personal preference. So you also notice that we have little marks on bolts. When you have this many fasteners on an assembly, I want to have a visual reference that those bolts were torqued. So we did follow the factory protocol as far as the torque sequence of these, and then as we torqued each one of them, we marked them, and then we went back over them again after that to make sure that they were totally snug down and everything was good to go. Now let's talk about the sealant a little bit more. We used a very sparing amount of this sealant. It may look like it squeezed out a lot, but the way that we applied it, it squeezed to the outside, and it's a very small amount. It's just when you have a white sealant with this area around it not being surgically clean, it looks like it's heavier than it actually is. All right, now we've got everything done over on our Bank 1 camshaft cover. We're confident that the camshaft timing is correct. Of course, before we did that, our chain tensioners were put back in. Everything's good to go. We feel really good. We're going to have great camshaft deviations now. So what we're going to do in preparation to go to Bank 2 is make sure that we don't make any mistakes. So the next step is removing this pin from the crankshaft and then immediately removing the cam timing tool. It is absolutely imperative that you have this tool out of the equation before you attempt to rotate the engine, or you will break the tool and break the camshaft. So tool is here, tool is removed, out of the way. Pin is removed from the crankshaft. Vu's going to hand me my 24. And now I'm going to rotate the crankshaft pulley 360 degrees exactly back to the same location at the teardrop. So when your teardrop mark here aligns with a boss that's cast into the crankcase, the notch on the back of the crank pulley groove here will actually align with the arrow on the crankcase, which says OT, which stands for on top. That means that cylinder 1 is on top. That's the German way of saying cylinder 1 is going to be at TDC. So we're going to rotate this 360 degrees clockwise. Never turn the engine counterclockwise during these procedures, or you're going to end up putting slack in the timing chains. It's easier to turn it over if you have the spark plugs out. But in this situation, Vu had already done his spark plugs. Getting really close. And now I want to have this in here so I can sneak up on it and put it in. So if I miss that, I've got to go all the way around 720 degrees to get back to this location. So now I'm set up for the proper crankshaft position for camshaft timing on bank 2. So this is often left out of literature. Even factory Porsche manuals leave this out. All right, so now we've rotated the engine around and we are on bank 2. Now, we've already rotated the crankshaft position to set us up at the proper location to finish the camshaft timing. Now, when we came to this side, I inserted my tool here, tightened the knob, tightened this knob. That mechanically forced this exhaust camshaft into the proper location that Porsche said was correct for this procedure, okay? Now, you see how this tool goes in and out with no resistance. Initially, the tool had heavy resistance, and I had to move this portion of the tool, which then is connected mechanically into the camshaft, and it moved the camshaft to the proper location. So when I have no resistance here, or very, very little, I know that I'm in exactly the right position. So when you're here, Vu, go ahead and torque those 4 bolts on the exhaust cam sprocket. Okay, we have now completed the camshaft timing procedure for the M96 engine. The M97 engine is very similar to this, however the tools that are used are different. You still have to set one bank, rotate the crankshaft position 360 degrees, and then go to the other bank. Now I will say, it's important to say, while we started on bank 1 to do this, you don't have to. We could have started on bank 2 and then done the same procedure with the crankshaft position and then did bank 1. That might be what ends up happening in the situation some of you might be in based on how you start and finish the work and where you're starting with on the engine. The tools used for this are greatly differing when you're doing a 3-chain engine. The procedure is the same as far as going from one side to the other. This tool is the only thing that will change. And the other tool simply just bolts in the back of the engine here, and it inserts into both the intake and the exhaust camshaft simultaneously, which is a necessity because those engines do not have the 4th and 5th timing chains that this engine has. So a little different procedure. You certainly want to research that. We've got other videos on my RenVision channel that show doing the 3-chain. You might want to check those out.
We're just about ready to wrap things up, but before we do so, I just wanted to go over the condition of my 98,000 mile original chain ramps. Care to comment, Jake?
Well, for 98,000, they look better than a lot do at 40,000, to be quite honest. So as we talked about, the way a car is driven, the oil services, not just doing the annual oil service and doing it more frequently, those things are key. The kind of oil you use is all key. But I've seen these completely worn and to the point they were worn in half and broken at 45,000. So with more than double that, you're already deep into the material, but they look good for almost 100,000 miles.
Yeah, and I'm glad we decided to do this because yes, it may not have thrown a check engine light on my car yet, but I've seen cars, a friend of mine, his wore down so much so that the pads fell off and inside the chains kind of blended up all these parts, and you got little chunks in the oil filter.
Yes, and at that point, it will throw a check engine light. You no longer have the correct cam adjustment. Those fourth and fifth timing chains will also continue to ride on the hydraulic adjuster, the steel portion of it. So that can end up breaking the chain, and then you have piston to valve damage. The other thing that can do is it just puts a lot of really small material from the chain and from the top of that adjuster in the oil, and that will create collateral damage. So when it gets this deep, then the rate of progression will increase dramatically. And the reason for that is because the deeper the chains dig into this material, the softer the material is.
Yeah, you can see it's completely solid really at the very top, but as you go lower, it's much more of a porous material.
Yes, the wear will accelerate at a greater rate the deeper it goes.
And this one here, you can see the middle of the chain has already started to ride on the guide.
Yeah, and that's got to be really deep for the rails. As you see here, the center doesn't have anything eroded there, just the outside. But here, you've got the inside and the outside.
It's almost perfectly flat right there.
And that's what happens. Once it gets this far, the middle of the chain will start to dig inside of this, and it will break it in half right in the middle because of the arch. You see the shape of the arch. It's easier for it to kind of chew right through the center of it, and that's what happens. And I've seen cars where people had them break completely. They continued driving it till it chewed the chain to the point where the chain broke, and it was a complete traumatic injury for the engine. Wow. And in that case, there was so much collateral damage, there was so much metal had gone through the engine that the filter was not able to catch it all, and it basically destroyed all the journal surfaces in the engine, all the way out to the cylinder heads. We had to basically throw the cylinder heads away.
Wiped out the engine.
Wiped it out completely. And again, it's because if you have a problem, you need to address the problem. It's not going to fix itself.
There you go. Last part of buttoning things up are these things, which look to be identical, but you're going to share some tips of how to make sure you put them back onto the engine correctly.
So since the inception of this M96 engine and through the M97 engine, these oil scavenge pumps have been a major confusion point for technicians and DIYers alike. The main reason is the factory directives tell you things and show you things that lead you in the wrong direction sometimes. Other manuals do the same thing, and sometimes people don't pay attention and create their own resource material when they take things apart. So since these pumps on this particular engine are the same, but they go on opposite sides of the engine, then you have to pay attention to which way they're supposed to be inserted into the cylinder head, okay? Now, before I go further with that, let's talk about the role of these. So these are the oil scavenge pump. So if you go back to the air-cooled days where we had a dry sump oiling system, then your main engine oil pump was the scavenge and the pressure side. So it was taking the oil out of the oil sump, pressurizing it, and then delivering primary pressure-fed oil to all the important stuff in the engine. With the design of the M96 and the M97, we have three oil pumps. We have these two, and their role is to pull the oil from the cylinder heads, okay? And the main oil pump will pull oil from the sump, okay? And pull that into the oil pump. But we have to get oil from our cylinder heads back to the sump. Because a horizontally opposed engine, gravity does not help it. So these two scavenge pumps set in the cylinder heads, they evacuate oil from the cylinder heads, they deliver that oil via internal routing all the way back to the sump area of the engine, where there are some de-aerators that are made to separate the air from the oil, because as these work, they will pick up some air with the oil. So that's a little confusion thing there. People think
is it like cavitation?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It keeps cavitation from happening, but people think that an air oil separator is in the sump, but it's not.
It's not.
The sump is basically the de-aerators. Okay, they're not to be confused with the actual external air oil separator. So these fit in the cylinder head, and if you do not clock them correctly, okay, you can turn them 90 degrees and they'll still install because the bolt pattern will allow that to happen. But they won't pick up anything because these oil ports are in the wrong spot, okay? Then you can also install them backwards, okay? So when we talk about the proper way to insert these, and I showed a lot of this in my engine rebuild video series because it is so confusing, and people that have come to my classes for years were totally misinformed and some of them caused problems with their other engines before they came to my class, which is why they came. Because the arrows that you see here, we need to forget these arrows exist. The manuals go over the arrows. All the arrows do is simply confuse you. The arrows are not to be referenced at all. That's the best thing I can tell you. So when you are working on a certain side of the engine, like cylinders 1 through 3 or cylinders 4 through 6, then what you do is we're going to pretend that this O-ring here is the crankshaft, okay? And then we're going to pretend that we're working on cylinders 1 through 3 on bank 1 over here, okay? Then we're going to pretend that over here we have cylinders 4 through 6, okay? Bank 1, bank 2. Forget the arrows exist. Since we're working on cylinders 1 through 3, 1 through 3 face inboard toward the crankshaft.
Gotcha.
Since we're working on cylinders 4 through 6, the 4 through 6 faces inboard toward the crankshaft. So what would be incorrect is if you had something like this. People start paying attention to the arrows and they're like, well, this one's going up in the direction of rotation of the engine on that side, and that one's going down in the direction of rotation, and 4 through 6 is over here, which is outboard, and that arrow's going down, so this is right. But this is wrong. Okay? So arrows out of your mind, forget they exist. You're working on 1-3, 1-3 goes inboard. You're working on 4-6, 4-6 goes inboard. That's the way you remember it.
There you go. And just like that, we're going to put those in with fresh O-rings. We're going to make sure that, are we going to put a little bit of sealant or something on these?
So I've got a little trick where a lot of times it's hard to hold these in place. They don't fit inside the groove really tightly. So I don't put sealant all around it, but I'll do a few dots. And the main reason is just to hold it in place, because when you're trying to install it, you'll think you've got it held in place. You tap this in, the O-ring falls down, you pinch the O-ring, and then you have an oil leak. So that sealant is just there to kind of tack it in place. Some people have used grease for that, but I think it gets a little too slick because the groove is so wide, and you can see that that groove is pretty wide to hold that O-ring. So
right.
Even a new one is a little bit too wide. So just a few little dots, and then let it cure for maybe about 8 to 10 minutes.
Okay.
Get a little tacky, and then you can install that. A little bit of sealant will squeeze out. It's not enough to hurt anything, but it will keep that O-ring where it belongs.
Perfect. Let's do it.